Owen, McLeod and Britt helps both large corporations and small businesses with insurance, risk management, and employee benefits using the same values they've held true for over 30 years: knowledge, vision, accountability, and service. More information is at bmbinc.com.
Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Usually it is sheriffs who are doing the pursuing. Well, this week we saw a radio station pursuing a sheriff, and it got its man. We'll look tonight at the sudden change in careers that could have a big impact in Jefferson Parish politics. We'll also look at another sheriff who is staying right where he is, and at Dixie Beer making a comeback. Shopping centers are facing challenges from the internet. We'll take a look, as well as examining a museum that has received funding but is yet to open. And our Future Watch segment updates plans for the care of the homeless. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources: ERROL LABORDE, producer of Informed Sources; David Hammer, investigative reporter, WWL-TV Channel 4; Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter; and Kat STROMQUIST, reporter, Gambit Weekly. We're going to go over to ERROL first, and the real big bombshell news for us in this region this week was Newell Norman, a real powerful sheriff of Jefferson Parish who's moving on to become a radio talk show host.
Not only powerful, but very popular. For him to get less than 85% in an election was an upset. I mean, that's when you fire the campaign manager at this point. I mean, he had a very successful career. Of course, he rose through the ranks with Harry Lee, who was a very successful sheriff. And the Jefferson Parish Sheriff's Office enjoys a good reputation. But you know what happened? His agreeing to resign, the way he says it, it wasn't his idea. That he was standing in line at a restaurant and he got a call from WWL and says, "Hey, you want to do this show?" And he started thinking about it. But he did say that he was thinking about not running again. And this reminds me that a lot of times that those of us on the outside, we look at politicians and we think that they're doing nothing but conspiring to run for more offices, more and more offices. But it's a hard job. I mean, it's a hard life. And you can imagine what it's like being a sheriff of a major area like Jefferson Parish, and all the times when the phone rings at 3 o'clock in the morning and a deputy's been shot or something. Yeah. I'm sure it's a real drain. And so for him to get this invitation to do a radio, and at first, I guess like everybody else, I was kind of struck by it, but the more I thought about it, it's a good choice. He's very outspoken. Quite often, I'm sure the issue is going to be crime, but he's very outspoken about government and politics. And he was a Republican, but he wasn't shy about attacking other Republicans, most notably David Vither in the governor's race. And so I think it's going to be a popular choice. Joe LaPinto, who was a former state representative and who was working on his staff as like chief deputy, will take over that position. And the way the law works is that when one of those parish offices is open, that the chief deputy runs is the interim official until an election is held, and LaPinto has already said that he wants to run, and so he's on that track and inherited that legacy of Newell Norman and Harry Lee. I think is very important. But yeah, he could be a real force in Jefferson Parish politics, and especially I think with the next elections that would come up, I think it's safe to say that Mike Indy is not going to be reelected parish president, but there's going to be a lot of people positioning themselves, and if it's a council member, there's going to be people positioning themselves for those council seats, and I think Newell Norman would have been a big influence in that.
Maybe even running. I mean, could he potentially run?
Could he be stepping out of parish politics to
position
pave
himself,
the way to put himself back into parish
having a radio
politics?
talk show is definitely a good platform to
But
publicize yourself.
once you get used to those 3-hour work days, I mean, maybe that's something that you now they would say, no, we work hours and hours preparing
Well, you have to prepare for
the radio broadcast, but it's
a bit easier schedule than being
It is,
sheriff.
but it's still a powerful position too. I mean, if power is what you're looking for, to have anchor spot, that daytime anchor spot on the 50,000 watt clear channel station like WWL is a pretty powerful position.
Well, as you said, the sheriff has never sort of been a shrinking violet. He definitely is quite outspoken in press conferences. He's definitely spoken his mind. So now he'll definitely have a venue to do that, and he knows how to do that. He knows how to use words.
He might use them a little more free-flowing
Yes.
on the radio than
Or
he
maybe
pretty
even
boldly.
less.
Yes.
Well, we would,
Without
sometimes
a
you would
public
think.
information officer at his back saying, "Stop talking."
Right, exactly.
The timing, of course, raised some questions immediately because it was right after his chief deputy, Craig Tafaro, was indicted. And so,
stepped down in June, right?
his former, that's right,
Yeah,
former chief deputy.
Right.
And he said that the U.S. Attorney's Office has told him that he's not under investigation, that it's just a furrow. I tend to think that wouldn't...
And everything I heard too is that he's totally cleared in that, and there's nothing. But it just was interesting because the timing was within a couple of days, I think, and so people got concerned
like you said, it's sort of suspect. But already, immediately, I mean, the news wasn't out an hour when it seemed like when other names were being thrown out there as a possible successor, including
John
former
Young,
president. John Young.
Yeah, there's a past president. But Joe LaPintos would really have the inside track
Well, he's going to have the
on
office
this.
for a while.
In the governor's election, when Norman took a stand against David Vitter, he was involved with an almost comic episode when some people were at a coffee shop and they caught somebody who was videotaping it, and they were able to make the connections just right there, and who it was, and they traced it back to the Vitter campaign.
And he made it known. He was not too pleased about that, that's for sure. Okay, it was an interesting move in politics, in Jefferson Parish politics, and also it's WWL Radio, we should say, that he'll be going to, and he's taking the place of retiring Garland Robinette, who's been in the media for a long, long time here. Good luck, Garland, with everything. Okay, over to Kat right now. And you did a piece about the health, shall we say, of shopping malls, which is kind of shaky right now.
It's definitely true. It's part of a national trend that's been going on that's sort of been accelerating in recent years. Several retailers, and big important retailers like Macy's and Sears, well-known brands like The Limited and BB, all of a sudden are announcing closures and shutterings and layoffs. So all those retailers typically have lived in malls, and you're starting to see malls that can't sustain themselves. You'll see empty malls in suburbs, all the big financial analysts are starting to forecast that malls might be something that we might not have anymore as public spaces. There hasn't been a new mall built in America in several years.
So what are they seeing the problem being for malls? I mean, what's causing this? Obviously, if retailers are going out of business and retailers need malls and malls need retailers because they're generally anchor, that's a big draw for people to go there. Why aren't people going to the retailers, the bricks and mortar retailers, and therefore going to the malls?
Well, there's a couple of different reasons. One is just, it's partly an aftershock from the Great Recession, that during that time, retailers started offering deep discounts to entice people, and they trained people to buy things at a lower price point.
We got used to it, huh?
Right, yeah. And another thing is just, it stems from technology. People are starting to shop online a lot more. And the merchandise that's offered in malls is not always the most exclusive merchandise. Like, you can often go in a mall, look at a shirt, and then look it up online and find a better price for it.
Right.
People also are becoming much more savvy about their shopping in terms of going to the mall and looking for something specific rather than just browsing around. So those retailers and hence malls are losing some of those impulse buying dollars, which they had been somewhat dependent on in the past. I mean, it's great for the consumers in the long run, but it's not great for the malls themselves.
So what's happening then, taking a look at our malls here, like Lakeside is one of our big, long-standing malls. Esplanade has had struggles, and then Oakwood across the river. I mean, and then of course the Riverwalk. How are all those malls looking these days?
Well, one of the reasons I checked this out was because I've seen some shutterings at local malls. At Oakwood Center, they lost their Sears, and the Sears company in general is just not doing well at all. And then there was the closing of Macy's announced at the Esplanade earlier this year. And what I hear from the mall management companies is that they're doing okay, but they're trying to reposition themselves for a more challenging retail environment. So what they're doing is they're adding restaurants and they're doing renovations to make the malls more exciting and more of an experience to come to. Like Lakeside right now is doing a $10 million renovation. The redevelopment of the Riverwalk cost $80 million. They've changed ownership and they're trying to set themselves up so they can both be more attractive to shoppers and also to tenants, to the stores that occupy them. Now one of the trends that's happening is brands are only opening one store in a market rather than several. So like you'd see like a J. Crew at every mall. Now you might just see one at one mall in an area. So malls are spending a lot of money to try and
make that big store.
Right, yeah, to make themselves the most appealing place for that brand to be located.
And what about the Esplanade? Like you said, it lost Macy's. That was a big loss. So what's it doing to make up for that?
It was a big loss. One of the things that they told me that they're doing there is they're trying to incorporate more community activities. They're doing health fairs and family-friendly activities. Like they had like a carnival in their parking lot, like that sort of thing. They're also considering different possibilities that might occupy that space where the Macy's was. So they've even floated the idea of having like maybe medical offices in that space where Macy's was. Like their advantage there is that Macy's was built recently, whereas many department stores were built in the 60s and 70s. So it's like sort of a more attractive piece of real estate. So they think that they can get a good tenant there to help sustain them and help drive people back.
What about standalone retailers in downtowns and stuff? Is it actually increased, or are they hit by the same problem with the internet? And
they're having some of the same problems, but one of the reasons why malls are struggling so much is that there were a lot of redundancies in terms of like what was available to purchase. And one of the trends like toward like urbanization or whatever is that people are interested in walkable downtown areas with boutiques and small stores. So those like small stores in downtown areas, I would think would be doing better than stores that are in these isolated suburban malls that are not like the same kind of environment that has become more popular.
One trick that Saks at Canal Place found was to locate across the street from a casino, because that apparently very successful.
No, hopefully they do good at the tables and walk over. And as you said, the walkable city, I mean, Perkins Row is a place in Baton Rouge, but that's sort of like the creation of I don't know if any of you guys have seen that. It's like the creation of a town, and it's all walkable, you know, as opposed to
Whole Foods there, and that.
Right.
That's a big model out west. A lot of cities out west have that model as their main.
Many California malls are like that, actually. They're more, because of the climate there, of course, like more of the malls are exterior rather than these enclosed spaces. And I think people, like the way people are shopping now, people enjoy that a little bit more.
But bottom line, our malls are holding on, even though it's challenging times for them. Okay.
They're doing their best.
Okay, thanks a lot, Kat. Going to go over to David right now, and you did a piece about the Intra-May. There's the African American Museum, which occupies just a lovely piece of property. I mean, some really beautiful buildings there on that property. But the museum is closed and has been since what, 2012?
Yeah, right, the end of 2012. I mean, look at after Hurricane Isaac, there was some damage, and they kind of had to make a decision, and they decided to close the main campus, and they were open for a little while as a part of the Jazz and Heritage offices down the street, but then even that stopped, and they really have no place. There's no place to go see the African American Museum, even though there's still a sign on Basin Street pointing the way, and people show up there every day, tourists wanting to go in, and it's just not there. And what I found was that they got a lot of public aid over the years, in particular $3 million CDBG grant, Community Development Block Grant, through the city in 2010 that really kicked in 2011. And they've used all the money, and they used almost all of it, or a huge percentage of it, on buying and then renovating a building across the street from the main campus. So you have all these historic properties, including the villa and the Passabon Cottage and some old slave quarters and stuff that were really good museum space for, I remember there was a Buffalo Soldier exhibit, there was stuff for, Leah Chase's culinary stuff. It was really nice, interesting exhibits and interesting space. And there were very old buildings that were hard to maintain, and they put most of the money into this other building that wasn't even part of the campus.
And it's not in use either. It's not occupied.
Right. So they've actually it's this nice, beautiful, new-looking building, but it's completely empty and not occupied. And they made it a lot larger than they originally planned. There was more problems with termites than they expected, and the cost just went up and up. And they ended up pretty much exhausting the money on that without enough money or cash flow to operate any museum.
Which is really frustrating to, well, to the community, but certainly to that immediate community, to the residents in Treme. You talked to, I think it's Mr. Jackson, Al Jackson,
right.
Yeah, who has opened up right across the street a little small museum called the Petite Jazz Museum, just to have something there to celebrate the culture.
Right, and he's a kind of informal historian for the neighborhood, and he cares a lot about the neighborhood. And, he thought he said it was a 20-year dream to have this open, and he says, I benefit from people coming and saying, where's this museum that I read so much about? He says, well, they're not open, but I am. But he says, I'd much rather have the real, the big main Treme, New Orleans African American Museum of Art, History, and Culture open than not. It would actually be better for my operation. It would be better for the whole community.
David, you've done some reporting about Irvin Mayfield. Right. Isn't he involved in this also?
Well, that was an interesting kind of side note. There's nothing specifically indicating what his role was in how the money was used. I mean, a lot of that was a decision made by a board before he became the chairman. But he became the chairman in 2013, and he after I did the story in 2015 about him funneling $1 million from the Library Foundation that he ran to the jazz orchestra that he founded and operated, there was a big backlash, and he stepped down, but it was not permanent, because then in 2016 he was reinstalled as chairman. And then a few weeks after he was reinstalled, I did another story about him going to New York City and charging $18,000 to the Library Foundation for something that had nothing to do with library business, and then he was out entirely. And at the very least, it was something that took their eye off the ball again, that caused more issues. He was involved in getting a loan with First NBC Bank, and they owe over $1 million on that, and now First NBC is kaput.
So it's just a very complicated issue. But the bottom line quickly is, will this museum open again?
Well, the people I spoke to who are on the current board, Michael Todd is the treasurer, and former board member Jeffrey Snodgrass, say that they're working as hard as they can to try to get more financing lined up. But, there's this public money that's already gone into it, and it looks like the money was all spent on the actual building and proper purposes, but it seems like there was some wasted money there, and the question is, will the city has the right to actually call back some of that money or call it as a part of a loan, and they have that decision to make in September.
Well, it is really a lovely complex, and hopefully it'll get back into commerce and reopen. Thanks a lot, David. Over to ERROL and Dixie Beer.
Yeah.
With a new owner.
Tom Benson's celebrating his 90th anniversary this year, and some people in their 90th anniversary might buy a beer, and he bought a brewery. Okay, and the Dixie brewery was. It hasn't been locally owned for quite a while. It started in New Orleans in 1917, and it's. In 1985, a couple called the Brunos, Joseph and Kendra Bruno, brought it. And at that time, local breweries were just in trouble. They were just facing a lot of competition from national breweries, and Dixie was having all kind of problems. They held on to it, but it's been private label brewed by a company in Wisconsin, and then most recently a company in Memphis. And people who know beer better than I do say that it doesn't taste the way it used to do, that they changed the hops and they changed the formula a little bit. And so Tom Benson's back. He's a majority owner. The Brunos are still involved, and he's very high in his praise of the Brunos and what they have to offer. But they said they're going to bring back the original formula. They're going to have more people working on the beer. It's going to be in kegs and long neck bottles, and supposedly the kegs are available this weekend, and so they're out there with it. There's a lot of people making beer now in New Orleans, but it's all these craft beer places, and they're saying that Dixie's going to be sort of like in the spirit of the craft beers, with that kind of attention paid to flavor and really trying to specialize in things.
Didn't the original formula involve Mississippi River water?
We know, you know, that was always part of what Dixie couldn't shake. That was always part of the image thing, because people would say, you know, it's just river water. Now, you talk to the Dixie people, and they were very sensitive about that issue, by the way, and they said, look, we go through the same filtration that everybody else does, that the water that we wind up using, you know, is real water. But that was always part of an image, I guess.
But people saw that as, now they look back and they think of that as a positive thing, because it was flavorful.
Yeah, right.
I think Jack's and Falstaff and Regal and all that would have fit. Well, actually, the craft beers, I guess, could do the same thing. But I'm convinced that it's possible to get pure water to make beer with. But anyway, they're you know, they're back in business, and so we're going to start seeing more and more. Now the question is, when you go to a Saints game, does that mean it's going to be nothing but Dixie beer? And the answer is no, because there are people that already have legal rights to be in there, and there's all kinds of laws governing that. So will it be
brewed here again in New Orleans?
Yeah. He's going to build a brewery. He said probably in eastern New Orleans, and part of what he wants to do is, you know, create more jobs. And by the way, the main building of the old Dixie Brewery, which is a very handsome building, is going to be part of on Tulane Avenue. Yeah. When you go down Tulane Avenue and see the VA structure, that sort of unique building, that was the administrative building of the old Dixie Brewery.
Okay, looking forward to having that Dixie. Thanks a lot, Errol. Over to Dawn now. The city made a move now on homeless underneath the interstate. I understand in New Orleans East as well as downtown. So what's the plan?
Well, a week ago there was another what they call sweep, and this is a regular operation that the city does to keep the areas where homeless tend to congregate under the overpasses, both downtown by the University of Medical Center and out under the I-10 on Bullard Avenue. The city sanitation or health department says they do these regular sweeps to keep infestations and germs at bay. It's not about removing the homeless as much as it's about keeping everybody healthy and keeping the area clean. These sweeps have been going on for several years. It's all part of the city's plan to reduce homelessness. The city told me today this plan is working. They say their numbers show that in 2007, after Katrina, there were about 12,000 homeless people in New Orleans. At last count, they say it's 1,100 to 1,200. But the people who tend to be based in these encampments under the bridges are often the hardest to reach. So to that end, the city has partnered with the Convention Center, the Convention and Visitors Bureau, and the Downtown Development District on something called a low barrier shelter. And that doesn't mean that the walls are low. It means that the barriers for getting into this shelter are reduced. So, for instance, you wouldn't have to pay a fee to get in, where you often do have to pay a fee to sleep somewhere for the night. You also don't have to take a sobriety test. So the people who really have a hard time getting into a regular facility would be able to go into this low barrier shelter. And it provides, at first, just a roof over the head. And at second, access to other services. They say that, you know, that they find that their homeless patients who seek out care at a homeless health clinic need shelter, they need physical health care, and they often need mental health care and addiction help. So this takes care of step one and hopefully gets them to step two and step three. That low barrier shelter, yesterday the City Council voted to pass a series of ordinances that will fund the operation of that property at the old VA on Gravier Street. Initial construction is expected to start in the next couple of weeks. It will open in the spring of next year. It should have about 100 beds. And individuals would be able to stay there for longer periods of time. It's not just an overnight. It will hopefully touch that hardest to reach population. The city says it will continue with their sweeps. The city's engaged, you know, they say this is a hard one to tackle. There's a whole homeless consortium that is 60 agencies working together, various healthcare, mental health care, job training, all of that together. And, you know, their numbers show that it's working. There's a request for proposals out right now for who will run this shelter.
But this will be a city shelter.
This will be
yes. But they're going to contract with a private group to actually operate the shelter.
They're looking for that right now. And this is, you know, when Errol and I talked about this topic, we talked also about the panhandlers on the street. And anyone who works with the homeless will remind you that this actually is really two very separate issues, that often the panhandlers aren't homeless, and if they are, they say the best thing to do is give that $1 or $10 you want to give the guy on the corner to a shelter that provides care or a mental health facility that provides care instead of just to that person on the street, that your dollars will be far better used if they go through the resources.
And so the timeline for the city, this new city shelter at the VA hospital would
next
be
spring.
next spring?
And then in the meantime, the sweeps will continue, and it is against the law to have mattresses and couches and all that on public space, so they do move all that out. People tend to, the longer they're allowed to gather under there, the more stuff they acquire, and you can end up with rodent infestation and bug infestation and all that.
Though for the panhandlers, isn't it against the law to be out after dark?
It is, and the New Orleans police will continue to address aggressive or illegal panhandling, but they have to do it carefully. They have to make sure they're not violating anybody's right to be on a public space.
All right, Dawn, thanks a lot. Quickly over to E. We have just about a minute and a half left or so for us to talk about the fact that Orleans Parish Criminal Sheriff Marlon Gassman unopposed.
Well, in the week when one sheriff decided to go on radio, another sheriff who has really one of the toughest jobs there is was reelected because his one opponent dropped out. A guy by the name of Freddie Brooks dropped out. He worked on before, and they showed that he had tax issues. Marlon Guzman's the term has been very controversial. It's a very tough job, but it's obviously, it's
Nobody else wants it.
It's a good thing it's not term limited, okay? Because if it was term limited, we'd have to go to Craigslist. to start finding people, okay? Because he's running for his fourth term, and just think of all the people out there, who could have run and they could have won. But the Orleans Parish sheriff's job. The rest of the state, the sheriff is also the law enforcer, like Newell Norman in effect ran the parish police department. That's not the case in Orleans Parish. For a long time, there was a criminal sheriff and a civil sheriff. They combined the two, but the main thing is that the Orleans Parish sheriff is a jail keeper, and there's times that the population there is larger than Angola, so it's really just a very difficult job, and he's been under those decrees. What goes on there is because he wants. He issued a brief statement when he was in effect reelected, and saying that I promise the next 4 years things will be better. So
well, hopefully there will be at the jail, because the jail definitely has had its share of problems. All right, time for us to look ahead, Errol.
What's about to get worse is the corner of Canal and Carrollton, or the corner of Canal and City Park Avenue, where this major construction project is going to begin on the 31st. And this is like 4 arteries. This is like Canal Street, the route to City Park, the route into Lakeview, and the route to the interstate. So it's going to be major congestion. It's going to cause a lot of problems for a lot of people for 4 months.
For 4 months.
4 months.
Hopefully that's all it will be. David.
I'll be continuing my reporting on the National Flood Insurance Program, and keep an eye on this, because while everybody's looking at health care and defense reauthorization, there is a deadline of September 30th to reauthorize the flood insurance program that we all depend on here in Louisiana so much.
Yeah, we need to watch that closely. Thanks, David. Dawn.
More of a public service announcement than a thing at the end, but schools are opening in this area starting next week. So be on the lookout for young children and buses and people who don't know their patterns, and just be safe in your car.
Hard to believe it's already school days again. Kat.
Upcoming entertainment, Cripple Creek Theater Company is doing a production of Caligula that I'm really excited about. It's about the eccentric Roman emperor. It's community theater, so it's free. That's going to be at Castillo Blanco, opening in August.
Okay, very good. All right, guys, thanks a lot for being here. Thank you all for joining us. And, of course, we want to see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
The firm of Bowen, McLeod & Britt helps both large corporations and small businesses with insurance, risk management, and employee benefits using the same values they've held true for over 30 years: knowledge, vision, accountability, and service. More information is at bmbinc.com.